This computer. All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. It's our All Things England edition, and who better to have on than usually he's our recurrent correspondent for England. It's Chris Williamson, former MP of Derby North. He's a fantastic full-time journalist, has his own program about Palestine called Palestine Declassified on Press TV, which he often co-hosts with the brilliant Dr. David Miller, who should be in academia right now, but anywho, that's the Israel lobby for you. They always are deplatforming people. And yes, he's our guest for the moment. And we're under short time, so we're going to get straight into it. So first off, Chris, thank you so much for coming back on the program. It's been too long.
Yeah, good to be back, Youri. Good to see you.
Likewise. And so, Chris, a lot of the questions I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you to be brief about, because I know you have another appointment coming up. So very briefly then, when there was major strikes going on with public transportation workers, nurses, and junior doctors over wages, what happened? What happened with those strikes? Did those working class folks get a wage increase, or did it go south, unfortunately? I think I've lost Chris again.
Oh, well, I'm frozen, Youri.
Oh, dang it. Yeah. Okay, Chris, did you hear my question, actually, by any chance?
I heard your question. Sorry, yes, you were talking about the industry dispute. Yeah, there's been some progress, Youri. The rail workers have secured an agreement, or part of the rail working union. The train drivers still haven't settled, but the other rail workers have reached an agreement. It is, I think it's a 5% wage increase dated backdated to 2022. But that is less than I think they were seeking. It is still less than the rate of inflation, so it does represent a pay cut. And it's, I think, therefore important that the working class and the organised working class in particular do continue to put pressure on the government and on employers to ensure that a remuneration package is commensurate with at least the cost of living increase in terms of inflation and so on. And that means obviously more people joining a trade union and collaborating and working together to deliver that. So there's still a long way to go. Far too many people are still living in poverty in this country. Far too many people are still working in precarious employment. And we are a very big and powerful economy, but unfortunately, income and wealth isn't distributed equitably in this country still.
And that includes our nurses, right?
Big one.
That includes the nurses who were also
yes, absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, there's been some movement, but it's nowhere near enough. The junior doctors are still taking industrial action, and sadly, the National Health Service is in a massive crisis. It is being hugely underfunded and being carved up and sold off piece by piece. I mean, effectively, it already has been privatized, and they want to go considerably further in that ideological agenda of putting everything out to the private sector. It might have an NHS ban on it, but lots of the National Health Service provision is now provided by private companies.
Unbelievable. And then very briefly, do you have any updates on the witch hunt and the ongoing abuse of Julian Assange and the efforts to free him?
I mean, he's reaching the end of the road in terms of where that is at. Obviously, there's a big campaign in his support. Increasingly now, people are speaking out. Thankfully, even some of the journalists, corporate media journalists, are speaking out. Not enough of them, it has to be said, but there has been some movement in that direction. But his appeal options are fast running out, and unless there is some movement in that regard, unless he succeeds at this next stage, or unless there is a a change of heart from the American US administration, then potentially Julian will be extradited. But that won't be the end of the battle. And already the preparations are being made to take the campaign stateside, the legal campaign that is stateside, to try and secure his acquittal as and when it gets into a US court. But that's going to be very, very difficult. And obviously, if we can, we want to ensure that he's freed before he's actually extradited to the United States, because I think his chances will be even less in the United States of a successful outcome than they have been here. It is an absolute international scandal that this man, who is the greatest journalist of our time, someone who should be hailed as an international hero, is being languishing in a high security prison in the United Kingdom now for getting on for 5 years. Actually, it's absolutely outrageous. And when you consider he's effectively been incarcerated for considerably longer than that, when he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy, it's a stain on Great Britain. I mean, all this talk about free speech, which is being massively curtailed anyway, but all this talk about human rights and free speech, that's meaningless, really, when you've got somebody who is the greatest truth teller we've probably ever known. His only crime, in inverted commas, is to expose war crimes and the abuse of state and corporate power. And that's why they want to close him down. And it's why we have to do everything in our power to ensure that he's freed.
Completely agree with you on that. And that's actually a perfect segue to this question. I'll just say very, very quickly that I love all the Palestine solidarity protests that's going on right now. But can you imagine if we had gotten that kind of mobilization for Julian Assange?
Yes, well, I mean, it would have been probably would have been a different outcome. But of course, there was a conspiracy of silence in relation to Julian's plight, and he was subjected to outrageous smears. Allegations were made, completely bogus allegations were made, and then there was a big campaign to force his extradition to Sweden to face charges of sexual misdemeanors there, which was subsequently dropped, and there was no basis to them. And a lot of people, there was two things really. One, he was smeared badly, and that was one of those smears to which he was subjected to. And you saw a lot of the kind of identity politics adherents, the liberal lefties who were jumping on the bandwagon, calling for his extradition to Sweden. I mean, and that was just a pretext really to get into Sweden so that it could then be onward extradited to the United States. I mean, what Julian said, he's more than happy to speak to the detectives, the police who were investigating these allegations. They could come to the Ecuadorian embassy and he would be prepared to talk to them there. But of course, I wasn't prepared to do that. And Sir Keir Starmer, who is the notional leader of the leader of the notional Labour Party, let's put it on that, because the Labour Party is no longer the Labour Party in this country. It doesn't represent the interests of working people. It represents the interests of the war machine and corporate capitalism. But he used to be the director of public prosecutions in this country. And when Sweden were looking to drop the case against Julian, his department sent a email to them saying, "Don't you dare get cold feet." Yeah. And so, his record is shocking in relation to Julian and a number of other aspects of really very important cases that he's dealt with. That he's demonstrated his sort of authoritarian streak, and I just fear that should he ever get the keys to 10 Downing Street, that we could be in an even worse situation than we are under the Conservative Party. And that's why it's important that we try and build an alternative to both the mainstream political parties in this country, and that's beginning to happen now. There is a number of new groups being established, but the key thing is we have to collaborate and work together. I've joined the Workers' Party, led by George Galloway, and I think they've got a reasonable chance of making some breakthroughs. But we want to see, numerous breakthroughs, and we haven't got the resources as a political party because we're still quite small at the moment to put candidates up in every constituency in the country. But we hope that we will have a chance to have other groups, parties that we can support and collaborate with, who will be able to field candidates in the seats where the Workers' Party can't. So hopefully we will begin to make some breakthroughs and get people elected into Parliament that will actually speak up for ordinary people and speak up for justice, speak up for peace, and speak up for people like Julian Assange and free speech. So important. There's nobody really doing that now. I mean, very, very limited. I mean, say there are a handful now, but regrettably, they were fairly silent when it really mattered, when, you know, Julian was first dragged into, out of, should I say, the Ecuadorian embassy and into Belmarsh prison. There was only one statement from Jeremy Corbyn and only one statement from the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. And, you know, it should have been, I felt, a lot more than that. I mean, I sought to try to make my voice heard on it, but I was a lone voice, regrettably. And it's good to see a few more now speaking out, but we need a lot more speaking out, a lot more people with political power to speak out, support Julian, and to stand up for what's right, you know, to stand up against the war machine, to stand up against corporate capitalism, and to, you know, use the powers available to them, and use the fact that Britain is a currency issuing nation and therefore has huge opportunities to invest in the economy and eradicate poverty. Never mind about eliminating street homelessness, which was what Jeremy was wanting to do, should he have had the opportunity. But I was arguing that we should have gone considerably further than that. And that's not just a pipe dream. I mean, Britain is an incredibly powerful economy. I mean, it's sixth biggest economy in the world. And with the right political will, then, you know, we can do these things. We can. It's not just a pipe dream to say that we can eliminate poverty and create a good society. You know, it's about having the political will to do it. And that's why it's important that we get people elected who will make the case, who will make that argument. And what we need to be doing is raising political consciousness and raising political expectations, and, you know, encouraging people to demand more from their political leaders rather than just being satisfied with the present status quo. I mean, I know it's a difficult task because the corporate media relentlessly churn out propaganda and imply that, you know, the sort of good society that I'm talking about is unaffordable, but that's just complete nonsense. And as Tony Benn used to say, if we can find the money to kill people, we can find the money to help people. And that's never been truer when you see the support which is being thrown at the NATO's proxy war in Ukraine and Israel's genocide that they're inflicting on the people of Gaza.
The perfect segue to then, which is, briefly, if it's even possible, your reflections on the massive demonstrations of Palestine solidarity protests, not only globally, but in your neck of the wood, Britain. And, you know, why, despite so much people voting with their feet, as George Galloway said, when there was the massive protest against the incoming second Iraq war, the invasion of Iraq, why despite so much people voting with their feet, so to speak, we can't translate that into our left-wing parties, even our liberal ones. And your response to that?
I think, you know, we have a better chance of achieving that now. We had that terrible disappointment, to put it mildly, when we saw 2 million people mobilise on the streets of Britain opposing the war in Iraq. And, people were mobilized worldwide, I think, at that point in time. But I think what we're seeing here now, well, one, we've had that experience, and I don't think people are prepared to tolerate, another letdown by the political leaders. But in some ways, I feel that the strength of feeling is even stronger now in support of Palestine, because people are seeing a genocide in real time, because people have got access now in Gaza to smartphones. And of course, we've got the brave journalists of Al Jazeera bringing us the reality of the Israeli bombardment, which more and more people are now seeing. And that doesn't compute with what the corporate media and the political class have been saying about the conflict there. It's almost as if history began on October the 7th, whereas in reality, it's at least 75 years. I mean, we've had 75 years of Israeli oppression and terrorism, actually, inflicted on the Palestinian people. And I mean, and Israel was born out of terrorism. I mean, the people, in the early Israeli governments were themselves terrorists who murdered and tortured, British soldiers and civilians, and ultimately they ended up, coming into power. But I mean, people are seeing this reality. Of a genocide. And people have referred to it as a Holocaust in terms of the numbers of people being killed. And I saw one statistic which showed that the number of children, for example, being killed on a daily basis on average in Gaza is significantly higher than the number of children that were killed in Auschwitz. That's an incredibly shocking statistic. But I was criticized on one corporate TV program that I was interviewed in when I referred to Gaza as a concentration camp, which is what it is. And I was criticized heavily for making that, or giving it that description. But if anything, it's gone beyond the concentration camp now to a death camp, because the numbers of people that are being slaughtered on a daily basis, it's truly shocking. And and the people that are being maimed and injured, and the fact that hospitals and schools are being targeted, and that hospitals are running out of supplies, and that Israel has sought to cut off energy and water and food. It was like a medieval siege. It's quite shocking. And when you think that our political leaders are supporting that, it's truly appalling. And and people, I think, have been really shocked and angered by that. And that anger, I think, could indeed translate into a political price that they will pay. I'm hoping anyway that it will at the next election, where that will give us a chance, I hope, to get people elected who will speak up for peace, as I've already said, speak up for peace and social justice in the world. And that election in Britain anyway is coming sooner rather than later. It has to be held next year. So that anger, I think, will still be fresh in people's minds. And
we're going to return. Let's definitely return to that because I actually do have a question about that. But before we get into that, then I have to ask you about the recent passing of a big wig of the Blair Witch Project, or the Brown Witch Project, which was Alistair Dowling. And how do you think leftists should assess his legacy, especially when it comes to his handling of the banking meltdown and the housing bubble? And then after you answer that, I want your thoughts on Lord David Cameron, or should I say Satan David Cameron, the man who lit Libya, Syria, and Ukraine on fire, and putting aside actually all the differences that people have when it comes to Brexit. But the fact of the matter is, this is a guy who called for a referendum when he should have known half of his party, half of the grassroots of his party, the kind of right-wing media which backs him, the big oligarchs that back him, like Rupert Murdoch, were all overwhelmingly for leaving the European Union. So he calls this referendum, he loses the referendum, and then leaves, kind of everybody else to, clean up, the mess and the turmoil of that. And now he's going to be the foreign secretary under this current Tory government, Rishi Sunak. So yes. So your assessment of Alistair Darling and what should we expect from David Cameron being the foreign minister, given the fact that, like I said, he lit Libya, Syria, and Ukraine on fire and left Brits in the mess for Brexit.
Well, far be it from me to speak ill of the dead, but I think Alistair Darling was a neoliberal. Let's remember. Although in his early days he was a radical revolutionary socialist, but obviously he went on a journey and ended up, as I say, a new Labour aficionado. I think the handling of the financial crash was a huge missed opportunity, frankly, to reset the dial. It demonstrates that neoliberal capitalism had completely failed. Unfortunately, we didn't have anything really to replace. There was things to replace it, obviously, but unfortunately, the political leaders, were very much invested in that whole neoliberal agenda. But I think we could have taken the opportunity to have an entirely different approach, and to really kind of revert back to the sort of agenda, talking about the Labour Party now, that we in the Labour Party were pursuing back in 1974, when there was a manifesto pledge to bring about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power for working people and their families. which was abandoned in 1976 when Dennis Healey went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise that Britain was somehow running out of money, which is impossible in a country that issues its own currency. And, we had been on the Bretton Woods Agreement, which effectively the gold standard since 1971. And indeed, Dennis Healey subsequently admitted that it was a mistake to go to the IMF and that the information he was provided by the Treasury officials was wrong. And, the dire state as he thought the economy was in wasn't as bad as they were implying. But even if it was, given that you're a currency issuing country, there was no need for them to go cap in hand to the International Monetary Fund. And so the first kind of neoliberal kind of monetarist government really wasn't Margaret Thatcher. It was Jim Callaghan and Dennis Healey's government in 1976. I mean, they sort of paved the way. Thatcher turbocharged it, of course, and then Tony Blair puts further boosters onto it, as it were. And, we're still living with the consequences of all that. So, neoliberalism is still holding sway, even though it's been an utter disaster in terms of poverty, inequality, and so on, and just in industry in general. When I left school in Derby, there was 120,000 people working in manufacturing, and now that's a fraction. I mean, they've been offshored. As far as David Cameron is concerned, though, your point about him, I mean, well, I think he will be an improvement. Obviously, it's a very low bar, but he will be an improvement on what went before him. And let's remember, particularly when we're talking about the situation in Gaza at the moment, and when he was Prime Minister, he did describe Gaza as an open-air prison. And he said that would have to come to an end. Let's hope that he sticks to that approach in his role as Foreign Secretary. I mean, as I say, it is a low bar, but I think he has considerably more gravitas than the previous incumbent and the sort of people who are in the current government's cabinet. I mean, they're all kind of political minnows, and he brings a bit of weight to the role. Let's see how things pan out. I mean, obviously, I'm not a fan of David Cameron, obviously, partly for the reasons that you set out. But given the choices that we've got, I mean, I think that he will be an improvement for sure on what went before in terms of the previous Conservative Foreign Secretary.
Interesting, and in fact, just. I have to say this about Alistair Darling, and what you were saying. Thatcher did say that that her greatest legacy actually is New Labour. So, yeah, and important to note, not one dodgy banker went to jail, right?
Yeah.
For
Exactly. I mean, I think Iceland is the only country that actually took steps against this banking spivs. It's a truly shocking state of affairs. The financial sector is far too big, far too powerful, and it distorts the economy. We need to get back to an economy that actually works in the interests of the people, not in the interests of a few financial elites. And lots of jobs, as I've already said, have been offshored to low-wage economies. The people. I mean, precarious employment now is endemic throughout the land. And if you think back to John Maynard Keynes, in 1930, he said that his grandchildren, that's basically my generation, would only be working 15 hours a week because of the advance of new technology, etc. Well, new technology has come, but the benefits of it haven't accreted to ordinary people. They've been siphoned off by the corporate elites, and that's what we need to change. And I used to argue, and still do for that matter, but when I was trying to democratize the Labour Party and leading a campaign of democratization of the party, that I argued that we should all become 21st century Luddites, because the Luddites have got a bad rap. And all the Luddites wanted was, they weren't against new technology, actually, but they said it should be our servant, not our master. And that's the point. I think that, if we take that approach, and, clearly, new technology has taken out some jobs, but most of the jobs haven't gone that we've lost in this country from as a result of new technology, because they've been offshored. I mean, I'll give you an example again, just locally in my home city. Rolls-Royce is still the biggest employer. I mean, there's still a significant manufacturing base in Derby. Nothing like it was. As I say, 120,000 in 1972 working in manufacturing when I left school. It's down to about 15 or so thousand today, maybe slightly more. Rolls-Royce employs about 11,000. But when I was a member of Parliament, they announced big job losses for some of their highly skilled technicians. And a couple of weeks later, they announced a big job recruitment exercise in Bangalore, I think it was, in India. So this is what's been happening, you know, I mean, I think what we should be supporting, obviously, is development in, you know, throughout the world, really, and giving people opportunities in every country to have the dignity of work, and not just in manufacturing. Obviously, manufacturing is one thing, but I mean, clearly, the public sector, the investment in infrastructure, in housing. I mean, one of the things, for example, in relation to the extreme weather events that we seem to be getting now, extra rainfall and the flooding. I mean, if we were to reforest the uplands in Britain, that would have a huge beneficial environmental impact and create lots of jobs. And it would certainly help to reduce the incidence of flooding, because having a forested uplands, it would hold the water for longer and release it, you know, more gradually into the watercourses, which would then reduce the amount of flooding that we get downstream. It's only so high you can build the walls. I mean, the flood defences, I mean, they keep being built higher and higher and higher. I mean, there were terrible flooding event again. I keep talking locally, but that's something I'm familiar with. In the mid-1960s, there were terrible floods in Derby at Christmas time, actually. I remember seeing people on the TV saying how they saw their Christmas presents floating down the street. It was quite a tragic event, you know, really, for people to be flooding at best. You know, any time is terrible, but I mean, you know, it's a time like that when the families come together and so on. And so, yeah, some flood defences were put in, and then they were then intensified. Some years later, they've recently been built higher yet again, and we had again the worst floods we've ever seen in Derby. Actually, I mean, thankfully these flood defences were put in place just in time. But they only just managed to hold back the water, and parts of the city that you know, haven't benefited. It's, to be fair, the more commercial part, they were devastated. I mean, you know, some of the car franchises, these big Jags and stuff, they were completely submerged. Millions of pounds worth of damage has been caused. So there's things like that I think that, you know, that could be done. So the massive need there is, and this is why I say, you know, with a currency issue in government, you could be investing in our infrastructure, bringing the public utilities and so on back into public ownership, stop paying out dividends to shareholders and using that to invest in the infrastructure, reducing fares, for example, on the rail, and reducing water bills and reducing energy bills. I mean, the energy costs in this country are ludicrous now. I mean, they've about doubled. I mean, goodness knows how people are coping. And again, that's another thing that we should be doing, as well as bringing these things into public ownership.
That's also related to the fact that people need their wages.
Well, exactly, but for sure, you know, yeah, absolutely. But if you can reduce the cost of living by, you know, taking these sorts of steps, because one of the other things that could be done in terms of investment in infrastructure is have a massive retrofitting of energy, you know, insulation, energy saving measures in people's homes. If we properly insulated everybody's home in this country, you would eliminate fuel poverty and, you know, create lots of good quality jobs at the same time. So there's plenty of things that need to be done. There's plenty of spare labour out there. There's still far too many people unemployed. There's still far too many people who are underemployed in the country. And, you know, it's about having the political will to do it. But none of the mainstream political parties have got that political will, Youri. That's the tragedy. And that's why we need to, you know, build a new vehicle. Very difficult to achieve.
Actually, my last question is actually about that. But before we get to my last question, then very briefly, Corella, coward woman, bravo woman, what's your assessment of this neo-Dickensian figure and her legacy? Will she make a political comeback if Sunak was to hypothetically lose under lose an election to Keir Starmer, who I think you've perfectly described him and previous labor leaders as the more, Glenn Ford once said about Barack Obama and the Democrats in the United States that they're not the lesser of two evils, they're the more effective evil, and that's to me the Labor Party. So I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a very good point, Youri. And that's a good quote. I hadn't heard that one. I might use that myself. But one of the quotes that I always used to say, the lesser of two evils is still evil. But I think that's a good point about being the most effective evil. And because one of the things I think about the Labour Party is that it's probably a bigger barrier now to socialism and a decent, good society and social justice and and peace. It's probably a bigger barrier than the Conservatives actually are. So that's a terrible state of affairs. I mean, I gave 44 years of my life to the Labour Party actually, so it grieves me to say that. But Braverman, I think absolutely. I think she's been on manoeuvres. I think the kind of positioning. I mean, terrible woman. My God, the policy agenda that she's pursuing is just shocking. And when you think of her heritage and where she came from, I mean, her family were expelled by Idi Amin from Uganda, and her rhetoric about asylum seekers and refugees is truly despicable, to be honest with you. I mean, one of the things we had a debate about this at the Workers' Party.
Also, what she said about homeless people, literally word for word, you would think she was like a villain from like a Charles Dickens novel.
You're absolutely right.
Which is why we need to cancel this ridiculous term neoliberalism, and we need to use the term neo-Dickensian in this.
Well, I mean, that's a good point, actually. But I mean, I think, she's on being on manoeuvres. I think in terms of her political future, I think she will. I think it's likely that Sunak will lose and she'll be putting a bid for the leadership. And I think she's got every chance of winning it. So, it is pretty grim. But just on the point that she her position in relation to immigration and refugees and people coming over on boats, etc. We had a debate about this at the Workers' Party Congress at the weekend, and the position that we took is that what we need to be just in terms of a strategy, it's not about pointing a finger of blame at the people who are very often desperate, and that's why they come in. Why would you leave your home? You have to be pretty desperate to kind of uproot and put yourself at risk, making a very perilous crossing of the English Channel, and very often make perilous journeys to even get that far. So what we've said is that, the focus should be on preventing the reason why people feel the need to leave their homes in the first place. So that means ending the imperialist wars, ending the corporate exploitation of countries, investing in development of these countries, and I suppose taking a leaf out of the Chinese book. I mean, their kind of foreign policy is to kind of help developing countries build infrastructure in developing countries. Yes, of course, there's a quid pro quo. They want something from that. They may have plenty of natural resources that China needs, but rather than sending in a gunboat, which has always been the tradition from Britain and the United States of America, they go in a very benevolent way and provide support and education, investment in healthcare, investment in infrastructure, and so on and so forth. That's the way. I mean, that's what we should be doing. And China, we see all this kind of nonsense and rhetoric that we see in the mainstream media and the corporate class about China. And look, I mean, I'm sure China. I mean, I'm not an expert on China. I mean, for example, one of the things that I don't like about China, it still has the death penalty, and I'm very strongly against that. But you look at the way in which China's invested in its economy and how it's lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty. When we're going in the opposite direction, we're plunging more people into poverty. So let's not criticize China. And as I say, as far as their foreign policy is concerned, I think it's far superior. And like Cuba, look at Cuba's foreign policy, small little island. I mean, and the thing that they are famous for is exporting healthcare, doctors around the world, providing support to people.
It's funny what you say, because like I often say, like, okay, even if you have your legitimate criticisms of China on this or Cuba on that, you have to admit, when it comes to foreign policy, they literally have been a force for good in the world. I mean, Britain, Canada, France, Belgium, Italy, Germany, New Zealand, Australia. Like, come on, we all of those countries are the reasons why there is, plutocracy, inequality, and people, going through desperate measures to flee their country under the illusion that everything's going to be all hunky dory once they go to the United States or to England, Australia, but then they're just sent to these I'll say it, concentration camps and so forth like that. So yeah, no, it's really unbelievable. And then our choices are a Suella, Cruella de Vil Bravo woman who just says these ghastly, again, neo-Dickensian things. And then your alternative is Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves praising Margaret Thatcher, the godmother of all this voodoo economics, regressive economics, and and all these and all these things. So that's a perfect segue then, because you were talking about the political party that you're part of, which was founded by George Galloway, the Workers' Party of Great Britain. I'm following very closely this new left-wing party, which is great on a lot of the issues I also care about, the Breakthrough Party. I think they're working with another group called Transform Politics or something like that. I'll send you the links after the program. So my question is this, which is, is there any hope of a new left seizing this historic opportunity to smash the Tory Labour duopoly, given what I've just said and what you've been talking about?
There's certainly the hope of that. There's certainly the potential for that. The thing that might scupper our opportunity to deliver that is the obsession with certain sections of the left on identity politics. And, I regret that Breakthrough and Transform, whilst, I've been more than happy to collaborate, because one of the watchwords I've been saying is that let's agree where we agree and have fraternal disagreements where we don't. And the focus, in my opinion, should be on the big issues about class politics, about economics, about anti-imperialism. I mean, clause 1 of the Workers' Party's 10-point program is very clear and unambiguous commitment to anti-imperialism, ending foreign wars, because there is, a huge beneficial effect on Britain, as well as obviously on the wider world of doing that. But unfortunately, some people on the left are obsessed with things like trans rights and issues like that. And I'm not trying to minimize those issues, but I think they've been used as a wedge and they've been used as to divide the left. And that's what we've got to be mindful of trying to avoid. I think let's focus where we agree. And on most things we will agree on, but let's not fall out. And that's what's been happening, I have to say, where some of the new groups like Breakthrough and Transform, for example, they won't sort of even share a platform with me. I mean, there was, without mentioning any names, but I was speaking at an event in support of Palestine, and somebody representing one of those groups that had also lined up to speak. And then when he realised I was speaking, he pulled out. Not so much because of my own position, but because I was close to George Galloway, and they didn't. I mean, George is, probably more socially conservative than I am, but George's, position on anti-imperialism is a dedicated socialist. His record speaks for itself over the years. I mean, George, when he was a young man, put his life at risk, actually, working undercover for the African National Congress during the apartheid era. That's the thing that we've got to try and focus on. There's a really good book, actually, called The Death of the Left by Steve Hall and Simon Winlow, which talks about this, and they trace it back actually to the late 1960s, but how it's being used as a wedge, really, and a divisive thing on the left. And we've ended up in a situation where we've lost sight of some of these important, bigger issues, and we've lost sight of class politics, and we've also, the left has lost large sections of the working class, which is what, we should be our bedrock of support, and we've lost touch. Many on the left have lost touch with the working class, and we need to get back to focusing on some of those bigger issues, which I think could win people over and bring them on side and help us to build a decent society again.
Actually, how much more time do I have with you? Because I would love to respond to that. But actually, how much more time do I have with you?
we're about out of time, but let's just sort of do one more round, and then I'll have to go because
Okay,
I've got
then.
to doing another
Okay, well,
meeting.
okay, well, I'll just say, the following. I think the left should be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. I think we should be able to confront institutional racism while confronting the twin evil of classism. Anti-imperialism. I mean, that's. There's a lot of you can argue there's a lot of identity politics, wrapped up in that. That's a way to unite, Black people, Latinx people, Indigenous people, people from Middle Eastern communities to mobilize and see that, and see that the capitalism that you guys suffer here is related to why people are suffering over there. And as a person who does believe in queer liberationist politics, I do think that that we can confront both classism, capitalism, and rainbow capitalism, if you will, black capitalism, if you will, and and so forth. And even if we do advance workers' rights, you do need to have protection for women who suffer from sexism, people of all skin colors who suffer from racism sometimes in the workplace, as well as people who face heteronormative queerphobic views, whether they are fully trans or whether they are or whether they're cis lesbian, cis gay man, and so forth like that. So that would be my only response to that. And yes, and yes, with George Galloway, I do have my disagreements with him on lots of things when it comes to, as you mentioned, socially conservative. But that would only be that. But that would just be my response to how we stop having identity politics and class issues divide us, but how we build those bridges, because I don't think it should be one or the other.
George's position is that he would, I think he's said word to the effect, I'm sort of paraphrasing now, but he would die in a ditch to defend anybody who was at risk of exploitation, discrimination, or violence. But what has happened is that identity politics and issues like trans rights and so on and so forth, gay rights and so on, they've been put center stage, and the issues of class and issues of capitalism, that's been sort of put on the back burner, really. And there's no longer, I mean, you've got a situation where the New Labour were very good at this, and even the Tories and Boris Johnson was saying we have the most diverse cabinet in history, more women, more black and brown faces around the table. But they weren't diverse. They were representing the elites in society. And that's the danger, I think, of this focus on identity politics. And you've got the appalling spectacle of the arms companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin marching along the gay pride march. That's the concern. And so, look, they're not the big issues. I mean, there are important issues, but and it also alienates a lot of people when you end up focusing on those issues and forcing that down people's throats. And you have to work with people and win people over. And I think that's why I think it's important that we start to focus more on those bigger issues. Let's end war. Let's promote peace. Let's tackle discrimination and exploitation as a result of class, and let's tackle the abuse of power that we're seeing with the corporate sector. Let's deal with inequality, financial inequality, economic inequality, and lift everybody's boats. But while we kind of get sidetracked and then forget about this stuff, this is how we've ended up in a situation where you've got these dreadful Tories in office, and a Labour opposition which is no better. But they'll be great on all these issues of of trans rights and gay rights and all that kind of stuff. They'll say, oh, we're totally on board with all that. But they don't actually deal with these other issues which have had a dramatic effect on people's quality of life.
Well, I would just say that there is no doubt that that the right, whether it's the Blair rights or the far rights or everything, in between, will co-opt, will co-opt, the movement sometimes. I mean, in America, they did this with, black capitalism as opposed to, black power.
Well, Fred Hampton.
sections of queer, sections of queer liberation, they'll do that with what we call rainbow capitalism and so forth like that, and that's where you get this ridiculous stuff of like of the woke CIA ad, or Lockheed Martin with rainbow stuff and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course. Fred Hampton, Youri. Fred Hampton had the right to prescription for all this. He said we didn't. It went on about how you tackle these big challenges in society. You don't tackle, for example, capitalism with black capitalism. You challenge that with through socialism. You don't sort of tackle sort of the discrimination. The way you tackle discrimination is through solidarity. Black and white kind of collaborating in that sense. So
exactly. I would just say just as free unsolicited advice to any left-wing movement, especially if it's one that has a large white working class population, which is, if you want to get a lot of people of color or even the LGBTQIA community to advance socialism, and sometimes when a lot of white working class leftists bitterly complain about identity politics, for a lot of black people, for a lot of queer people, that's dog whistle for, don't talk to me about white supremacy, don't talk to me about the patriarchy, and don't you dare talk to me about heteronormativity, especially if it's trans liberation. I think there is a way that we can chew gum and walk at the same time without having to sort of say to this marginalized group, we're not going to address your issues just yet. I think there's a way that we can slay all of these evils with with one stone, or one AR-15, or however should be the metaphor of that. So I would I would just say that, and I know for a fact that you, a student of history, knows knows all of that. If you do look at Martin Luther King Jr., even Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, and so forth like that, they all have, W.E.B. Du Bois, they have all said like a version of kind of what I've said. Even nowadays, with Black, with Black Agenda reports and other, similar outlets, even queer liberationist left outlets, but there's something that's always getting kind of lost in translation, but that's why we do need to have like a proper dialogue and talk with people about how we can slay all these evils with one stone, because like I said, it shouldn't be so difficult. I think when you talk about workers' rights, I think the rights of women, the rights of queer people, the rights of Black people, Muslims, and whatnot should certainly be included with that. It's all just how you address it in whatever party platform and whatnot. So I would just say that.
Have a read of that book anyway, The Death of the Left, Youri. It's a good book, and yes, I'll happily check it out, and of course, being friends with you, I'll definitely also send you a couple of links. But until then, because I know because we now are out of time, right? Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things UK edition with Chris Williamson, the former great MP of Derby North, of the Labour Party, and then later independent, and he's also the host of Palestine Declassified, which people should check out on Press TV. And Chris, the name of the political party that you're with George Galloway is the Workers' Party of Great Britain, right?
Workers' Party of Britain, yeah.
Folks, if you're interested, especially if you're based in England, check them out. And until then, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope that we, I definitely want to invite you on in the future because, had to change my, want to talk about the history of the Labour Party, but we'll do that next time. But I don't want to go away from your next appointment. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Best of luck, all the best, and season's greetings to you, Youri. Have a good Christmas.
Yes. Merry Christmas to you and your comrades, and to your Jewish comrades as well. A happy Hanukkah to them.
All the best. Cheers, mate. See you then.